It's been probably 3 or 4 years since I've posted, and obviously a lot of what I was posting previously was surrounding the whole area of lockdown and all of that kind of stuff. World's kind of shifted and moved on in so many different ways. And it's always good to take stock and look back at where we were 3 or 4 years ago, what the issues were then, and some of the issues that we have now are surrounding things like immigration. We seem to have an increasing element of what I would view as totalitarianism in Europe among some of the elites and some of the groups that are managing and running our countries from a governmental point of view and civil service. We've got people like Liz Truss coming out and talking about how there are issues with the civil service in regards to extremism, although being referring extremism. We have issues in regards to transgender and our children. What I want to talk about a little bit today is the concern that I have regarding freedom of speech. And George Orwell, typically in his novel 1984, talks about totalitarianism. In actual fact, it was a kind of almost a social commentary on some of the features of people that see in a totalitarian era and a totalitarian regimes. One of which will be the constant speaking of that which we know isn't true. As a truism, to the point where people really are unsure what is true anymore. It's the first example of real gaslighting, and we see Winston in a chamber being told that there are 4 lights when in actual fact there were 5. So this is an example. The other thing is we had in 1984 was something called newspeak, where the language was being altered and changed to basically limit the amount of words in the vocabulary that a common person was able to use. The idea being that it would make revolution and it would make dissent impossible because people wouldn't have the language to express dissatisfaction. And I think some of those things are happening in the world today. We've got certain words and certain ways of explaining things and certain phraseology and certain subjects that we're no longer allowed to talk about. We've got the European Union, and we've got various other governmental organisations that are now talking about censorship and removing the right to free speech, or categorising free speech in terms of the things that are able to be said and things that aren't able to be said. For example, it's okay to be free speech provided you don't offend people, and somebody's always going to be offended incidentally. Then you have also this problem reaction solution situation going on. I saw a man arrested in Hyde Park Corner last week for making a statement. There was a right-wing statement you would say, and that was obviously unsavoury in terms of the government, or the government saying their social media lockdown, the way in which they are locking people up for social media posts, which is well documented. Then you see a guy getting on stage at Glastonbury calling for the death of the people in the IDF, and that's okay. But the problem you've got is that people on the right and people who seem to be sensible, in my opinion, regarding the way that we're looking at refugees and the way we're looking at the situation in Israel, people on the right are calling for the guy on the stage at Glastonbury who was stating his opinion to be locked up, to be equal with the lady that's been in prison went to prison for 3 years now for making a social media post around the time of the riots in Southport. What gets me is the fact that, in my opinion, her stating what she thought to be at that time, okay, angry, ill-advised probably, not particularly nice. The comments she was making regarding the Islamic community, in terms of freedom of speech, I would defend her right to put that. She obviously put it, they made a social media post and then brought it down super quick. She's gone to prison for that. I would say that from a freedom of speech point of view, that is concerning. Now, the way we ought to, when we look at the other side, and there's somebody on the stage at Glastonbury calling for people in the IDF to be killed, that also is a guy exercising his freedom of speech. And I don't agree. In actual fact, I agree more with the females in prison than I do the guy who's still on stage at Glastonbury. The point of the matter is, if we turn around and we say, if this person on the right has made a statement she's gone to prison for it, then the guy who's admittedly on the left who's making the same statement should also go to prison. The truth of the matter is, neither of them should, because they're both expressing their free speech. And one thing that we've got in the UK that is now becoming less and less something we can take into account, something we can take for granted, is free speech on the left and on the right. And I think that freedom of speech is a principle that needs to be protected, and what we should be doing is protesting about the lady that's gone to prison, not looking to try and see other people go to prison who are on the opposite side of the argument. So my main concern is that where we have governmental organisations overstretching themselves to the point where they're declaring politically what people can or can't say, I think that is a danger to society. And it's, even if we're not in a situation where we have a despotic, totalitarian government, which I think we have something that's leaning in that direction, my concern is necessarily even this current Labour government. It's potentially the government that comes after it, or the government that comes after that. Because once we give away the powers of free speech, and once we enshrine in our law the fact that there are limits to free speech, the people who are the gatekeepers, the people who are declaring politically and making decisions politically over what is appropriate speech and what isn't appropriate speech, those people are people that are holding power. That's a concern, because they're removing the ability of the British people, like they did during COVID, where we weren't in a situation where we could go and protest. When you take away the ability of the British public to protest against its government, that is really, really dangerous, because that's saying that an elected government has the right to pretty much do whatever it wants for 5 years once it's elected. The first time we do a suspension of those elections, we've got real problems, and this isn't just in the UK, this is European-wide. The other thing that concerns me is that it seems that these European governments, whether they're the German government or the French government or the UK government, seem at this moment in time, having handed over much of their sovereignty to Europe, Keir Starmer still trying to hand sovereignty of certain things over to Europe, they seem to have more of a affiliation and more of an interest in non-governmental international organisations such as the EU and such as the World Economic Forum. Keir Starmer seems more interested in replicating those voices than in just looking out for people in the UK. My concern is that by the time we get to the next election, we will have handed over so much sovereignty to the EU, to the World Economic Forum and organisations like that we won't have any sovereignty and any sort of self-autonomy left as a government in terms of setting tax policy, in terms of setting health policy. We may be in a situation where things have already moved past the crisis point. Now, I don't know what to do about this. I don't know if there's anything I can do other than to come on here and speak out and say that I'm really, really concerned with the way that the nation is going in terms of increased Islamification of certain institutions. Every single mayor in the UK seems to be a Muslim there, or many of them. It seems to be almost like little fiefdoms, and that's a concern, because there are certain enclaves within the UK when you talk about where they're showing along, and a blind eye is turned to them, which again is a concern. We're not a Muslim country, at least not yet. The introduction of what is effectively a blasphemy law. So there are certain ways in which this current Labour Party is coming in favour with this minority as a means of either getting into power or staying in power. And these things are concerning, and they're concerning a lot of people. What do we do about it? I don't know. I mean, during the COVID period, we didn't agree with it. We just went to the supermarket without a mask. We posted people on social media that got took down. People didn't go to prison for those social media posts. Now, the issues that we've got, we seem to have escalated that censorship and that inability to actually post what we think. I'm posting for the first time in 3 or 4 years. I don't even know whether the YouTube algorithm will allow this video up. Just putting this out there. Obviously, I've not posted for quite some time, so I don't expect to get too many views. If you've watched the video and you want more content, you want me to start making social commentary this way, please like our video, by all means share,